Delighted to welcome you all, and particularly to welcome our guest, Marilyn Garson, who is joining us at 6 a.m. in New Zealand, along with another friend of ours, Vivian, who I hope we'll hear from. I'm sure, well, maybe she'll have a question or a contribution later. So the way this will run is the webinars have been running lately with more of a conversation rather than straight speaking. So I'll be in conversation with Marilyn for maybe 30 minutes or so, 30, 40 minutes. And most of the rest of the time will be open to everyone else to ask questions or make short contributions. And from time to time, we'll pull Marilyn back in to respond to questions and to the comments as well. So I'm sure you've read stuff. So Marilyn's written two books. One is just out of reach, which is called Still Lives, which is about her time in Gaza. And this one, which is what we're going to be talking about today, I was going to say tonight, but that seems the wrong thing to say. Tonight is this book, Jewish, Not Zionist. So without any more ado, I'm going to start with my first question to Marilyn. So your book combines a personal story with issues that are basic to the pro-Palestine movement. And you wrote it after October the 7th, 2023. Can you tell us why you felt it was important to write this in a Jewish voice at this time?
Well, let me first say thank you to you and to JVL and to Kay Green for this evening. I'm speaking from Aotearoa, New Zealand. And at the end of last November, I was invited to write a book that builds the movement. It's quite an open invitation. I said, what does that mean? And the publisher said, you'll figure it out. I had previously written really targeting the dehumanization of Palestinians, which I believe is the foundation of the walls around Gaza. So I thought again, while this current attack was going on, and I decided to write about what happens when I came home and when I stood up for Palestine. I wanted to walk right into the confusion between Jewish and Zionist. Our Palestinian partners tell us that that is one of their biggest obstacles, and they ask us, their Jewish friends, to clear that fog. They say new people are sitting back and being quiet, not because they're indifferent, but because they are confused. What is the difference between Jewish, Zionist, anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic? So I wanted to bring all that into the light. I also wanted to tell a story that comes from the rest of the world. You know, it's different from London and New York, where we frequently hear stories. But what happens when a person stands up far from the centers of power? It's not a book about being driven out of the Jewish community. It's a book about assembling a Jewish identity that is liberatory, spiritual, activist, creating those Jewish spaces where they didn't yet exist. So it's a book about foundations.
Okay. So you wrote it when they had the genocide was on, and then we had a ceasefire, and now Israel has resumed pulverizing Gaza since March the 18th. Do you feel this has changed things? And this might be a time also to tell us more about your personal experience. Oh no, maybe we'll do that later. Just talk about what you think may have changed.
I think it has changed things. I think this era is different on both sides. I notice that we come up against a reinvigorated a performance of outrage that is different this time. Israel's advocates have rushed in to fill the space that was licensed by Donald Trump. And it feels like people are trying to set March 18th as a new baseline, a new normal. Now, Israel may bomb civilians in their tents, kill 900 people in a week. That is the new normal, and any protest will be met with this absolute outrage. And make no mistake, I think this reinvigorated outrage is not fragility. I think it is performance politics. So I feel for me, like this is a time to dig my heels into what I know, to really be brought back to basics, to remember that March 18th is not the normal. It is not the baseline. October 6th was not normal. Blockade, illegal occupation, they are not normal. The baseline that we refer to, and we protest anything beyond the baseline, the baseline is the knowledge that Palestinians have the same rights that we have to sleep safely in their beds, to be at home. That's normal. No amount of shouting can change that. On our side, I feel like the reinstatement of this assault has triggered a kind of despair, a kind of hopelessness, as if people hoped that we wouldn't need to do this again, but here we are. And I spent most of 18 years in war-affected places. Since October 7th, and again this time, I feel a resurgence of the helplessness that I used to feel. You know, we are raised, we are trained to think that we should change something. We should impact this world. That terrible phrase, we should make a difference. But I've spent a lot of time in places that I cannot change. And you learn to value the things you can do. You learn to value witness. You learn to value accompanying people through their world. You learn to value the community of people who are not afraid to be in places that they cannot change. There.
Yes, you were saying the things you cannot change, yeah.
Yeah. So I came to appreciate the value of witness, of accompanying people, and the community of people who are not afraid of the long work of peace and justice. And here, I learned that from Palestinians and from Māori, from the Indigenous people of New Zealand. Indigenous struggle either learns to take the long view, much as it works every minute, it learns to live as well as to struggle, or it will not be sustained. And I feel like this is a moment that when we need to remember that lesson, this is the work of generations.
Thank you. I think well, I know I would be interested to know a little more about your personal experience. What inspired you to do the overseas work in Cambodia and Afghanistan, for example, as well as Gaza? And I remember you once told me that you weren't an activist. So how did these experiences turn you towards activism? Because I certainly see you as an activist now. And before you reply, it might be of interest for you to know, I don't know everyone here, but there are some people who've been in Gaza. But we also have Glyn here, who captained the Jewish boat to Gaza, I think in 2011. But many of us will have been to the West Bank, but not to Gaza. And those who've been to Gaza probably weren't there while there was a war on, which is what happened to you in 2014. So I know it's quite a lot, so I hope you can cover that all right.
Right, and let me just say that in the background, my cat has belatedly discovered a catnip toy in which she has shown no interest previously. So I'm sorry for the bouncing thing in the back of the screen. As a child, I was fascinated by the children in Vietnam and Cambodia. I guess that makes me an unusual child. I knew that they were not explaining genocide right. I knew there was something that I needed to learn there. So when I was no longer a child, I started to travel to Cambodia and I learned the language. And eventually I worked there with child soldiers, former child soldiers, and people with disabilities. And that's where I really fell in love with my work. We were establishing enduring locally owned social enterprises to create employment where employment was most elusive. And I was always drawn to the longest odds. Later, I worked for 5 years with Afghan women who were not permitted to leave their homes, but still needed to earn income. I mean, the longest odds we could find. It was the most extraordinary adventure on top of everything else. And I worked with a philosophy that we called the power of being believed in. And on the strength of those 5 years, in 2011, I received a completely unsolicited invitation to take a job in Gaza and try to build something enduring behind that blockade. And we did, by the way. Our enterprise continues to function, although this year it has had to relocate to the West Bank. What I found in Gaza, quite simply, was that people did not let go of me. You know, through all the days of, I was there for 4 years, 2 wars, and we used to call each other at the end of every afternoon, send messages to everyone because the nights are so much harder than the days. And no one let go. It was as though if we didn't let anyone drop, everyone would survive. Somehow that's what I told myself. And without a doubt, I look at that time as a gift. Whatever impact it may have had on my life or my health, it is a gift to be given the chance to live among the people who you have been told for half a century are your enemies. After the 2014 war, I was so stunned by what Israel was permitted to do. One of the things that I did through that war was to notify the IDF every 12 hours of every United Nations building that was being used as a shelter. So they knew, every 12 hours, they knew which buildings were packed full of displaced people. And yet they fired on 7 shelters. And I thought, how can this be allowed to happen? How can we allow it to happen? So I resolved, and my team agreed that we would tell our story, thinking that when folks recognized the human beings behind that wall, the wall would become intolerable to them. That's where I made the transition from overseas to some kind of activism. This time, Israel's tactics this time are just intolerable to me. Because I spent most of my years in Afghanistan, Cambodia, and Gaza, people in every community that I worked with have now eaten grass to survive. In a world that has food, they have been allowed to starve. And I just cannot live with that. That's why I'm still doing this. So I know that covers a lot of space. I still have a hard time thinking of myself as an activist, because I see other people who have spent decades on the front lines in their country, withstanding the kinds of pressures that I've only encountered in the last decade. But okay, here I am.
Thank you so much, Marilyn. We probably will come back to Gaza, but as a Jewish-led organization, another very interesting aspect of your book and your experience was the treatment that you had from your synagogue. And again, tell people a little bit about how involved you were and how seriously you take, because many of us here are secular, but for those who are observant members of JVL, they will have had similar experiences trying to express their opinions about Israel's treatment of the Palestinians. So do tell us. I think it would be fascinating for people. Thank you.
Well, also unusually, after being an alienated Jew for a quarter century, I rediscovered my religion while I was living in Afghanistan and then Gaza. So I rediscovered a very outward-looking religion, and it became very important to me when I came back to New Zealand to find a Jewish community, a synagogue, a place to learn and develop a practice. Parts of our religion are socially performed. They simply are. And that makes a synagogue community perhaps more important than it would be to people in other faiths. Also, in Wellington, which is the capital of New Zealand, there were no Jewish organizations outside of the synagogues. So I saw no other way to pursue this path and establish myself in my home, reestablish myself after being away for 20 years. Therefore, for 6 years, I was a member of our progressive synagogue. I qualified as a lay service leader. I am Baal Kriya. I am one of the people who chant the Torah in the traditional ways. And that meant that I stood up in front of a congregation and I sang, I gave it all, standing in front of people, some of whom were actively trying to destroy me. They snubbed me and they bullied me and they lied flagrantly about me, all of that. The Australia-New Zealand Union for Progressive Judaism and the board of the synagogue, they led the charge. They absolutely modeled this behavior, and some number of followers eagerly fell in with that permission. And by the time I left after 6 years, my body had begun to respond with something like what they used to call shell shock, an embodied shock. I called it my shell shock. I would not advise anyone to do what I did. I threw my health away. I kept telling myself that eventually they would see the person through the politics, but they do not at this time. I lacked the wisdom, really, to walk out faster. And I had no place to go. So that was part of my reason for writing. We need to say that this treatment is wrong, and we need to be speaking to other Jews who might still be asking themselves, if Israel is not the source of my identity, then where will I belong? I say to them, Zionism is a wall. It's there to hold the world out. And just beyond that wall is an expansive, pluralist, politically alive, liberatory Jewish community. Come and belong with us. We also responded by establishing alternative Jewish voices and an independent minyan. So now there are places to go. That's a part of this rest of world story where you need to establish what is missing. Those ideologically stuck buildings, they do not give us our Jewish identity. We are also the Jewish community, and we need new institutions.
Oh, thank you. It might be a time for me to, this isn't a question, this is reminded me about an article that we posted on the website. So it may be of interest to people to read. It's called Towards, I think it's called Towards a New Radical Jewish Denomination, written by someone called Joseph Finley. And one of the, he's saying we need exactly a community, and it's not only not identified with the Jewish state, the so-called Jewish state, but actually with any state. But I don't want to digress, but you may find that people who are coming here may find that of interest. I've just got a couple more things before we open this up. And so interested to hear more about your work with Maori people and why you think it's so important. Obviously, Britain is responsible, or is, however we want to define it, for so much colonization that you, and above all the Maori and so many other indigenous people in so-called post-colonial societies across the world are trying to address. Sorry, that was so convoluted. But you said to me, solidarity has a different sound in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So can you say a bit more about how the integration of Palestine and Maori voices change the national movement for you?
It really has. You may all have heard that recently I think our youngest parliamentarian, who is a Maori woman, she gave a haka, a challenge in Parliament, and that has been viewed some 500 million times. And then we held one of our largest ever political gatherings on the steps of Parliament. That was all for the protection of our founding document, Te Tiriti, the Treaty of Waitangi. At that astonishing gathering, there was also a Palestinian speaker. These issues are truly integrated here now, and I think it makes a huge difference. It is a very intentional wrapping of the issues. Our events respect the Maori authority of the land, and that expectation shapes us. You know, a week after October 7th, I think it was the 15th of October, 2023, while around the world everything was steeped in outrage, we held a spiritual vigil, and we expected a few hundred, but around 1,000 people came. In a terrible windstorm, we're all leaning into the wind. And the speakers, addressed spiritually the work to come. So from the very beginning of this time, I was speaking about the Jewish concepts. I was standing in between Maori elders who were anchoring this in the nonviolent protest in their history, and Palestinians who were speaking about a future vision. One reason for this is that our founding document, Te Tiriti, it is an invitation to coexist. The Maori leaders who signed this document were inviting coexistence on their land, and that is what we're asking of Israel. I know that I live here. I'm an immigrant, as you can hear. I live here as Tangata Te Tiriti, the people of the treaty, and I know that I have a welcome on that basis. Understanding that Te Tiriti's model really helps to say, you don't need to be afraid of decolonization. You don't need to be afraid of sovereignty or real power sharing. This is a model, an invitation that we extend to the world. I also think there is an interior dimension of working together. On the night that this book was proposed in Parliament, I was sitting in between Maori elders and some of the young leaders of the Palestinian movement. We are three peoples who carry truckloads of intergenerational trauma. Although we manage it differently, we all have that in our genes by now. And yet we come together to see the future in each other's eyes. And that is not only politically important, that is deeply healing. So I feel like I have learned about how to live in my country through this protest. And of course, politically, every linkage that we make extends the movement for Palestinian rights. It embeds this movement. as more and more people understand that Palestine is their issue also.
Thank you. My last question before I open it up is something that's been a huge issue for us in the UK for sure. But can you tell us what you see and what you've experienced in your own country about the dangers of conflating criticism of Israel and Zionism with anti-Semitism and how that is evolving now?
Aotearoa New Zealand is one of rather few Western, for lack of a better word, countries. It's really funny to call us Western, but okay. We are one of relatively few such countries where the IHRA definition, the confusion of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, never gained an official toehold. It is not our national definition, and we have very helpful publications from our Human Rights Commission, which speak to the dangers, the harms that happen when you confuse anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. However, that does not stop Israel's advocates from simply using the definition. So while it is not our definition, we live with the confusion. There's been a national survey of anti-Semitism here, which used that definition to call 2/3 of New Zealanders anti-Semitic. So that confusion and the harm of it goes to the heart of this book. Our Palestinian partners tell us that this is their biggest obstacle to new engagement. When they try to engage with new people, what they encounter is not racism and it's not indifference. It is the fear that a person's instinctive desire to care and help will somehow harm the New Zealand Jewish community. They ask us to cut through this confusion, and it remains really our job as a Jewish community to help untangle that knot. So even if you think you're beyond that, I really believe this is a foundational, ongoing task of ours. I also think that it's an issue which is changing right now. With the election of Donald Trump, anti-Semitism has simply become a pretext for tyranny. It's not about race anymore. There's not even a nod to Jewish safety in the new round of accusations of anti-Semitism. It's now a lever to pursue Donald Trump's demons, whether they are individual students or the very concept of academic independence. What that means is that we need to change our response. We've become accustomed to saying it is not anti-Semitic to criticize Israel's actions, and that remains true and that remains important. But I think at this point, that is insufficient. We need a power analysis. When the word is thrown around now, we need to ask, what does it license? We need not a race, but a power analysis. And when you put it that way, it becomes familiar, right? Tyranny of any kind seeks a state of exception to extend its power. And anti-Semitism is now a way to manufacture emergency and wield exceptional powers over immigration, over detention, to get people to forfeit their rights and discard the laws. I hope that this will be a moment when the Jewish community realizes that the tyrants, and Donald Trump is certainly not the only one, they are not actually anyone's protectors. They are a threat to all of our rights. And I'm hoping that more of the Jewish community will join the opposition rather than trying to befriend the tyrant.
Thank you so much, Marilyn. I have many more things I'd like to ask, but I feel it's probably time to see if other people want to contribute. Can I ask if people would put up their electronic hands, just because it's hard to see you otherwise? And the way you do that is, I mean, it differs slightly, but there's probably a little heart saying react and a little arrow next to it. No, click on the heart, not the arrow, and then you get raise hand. So I've got a few hands up already, so I'll take them in the order they've come up. So I've got Rona, Chris, and Vivian. So Rona, if you would unmute, and
yeah. Thank you so much, Marilyn. Thank you for your for getting up at 6 a.m. and thank you for your talk. I was rather disturbed by when you talked about your trajectory, and you said you endured a great deal of torment and bullying and suffering over a period of 6 years because you said you didn't know where to go. I mean, I don't know if I mean, first of all, I really, really admire your courage for speaking out and for doing what you did, and for actually uncovering the reality of the situation, and for writing the book. I really, really, really admire you for so many reasons. But I don't know. I think if I were in a situation personally where I was being bullied and slandered and treated like absolute dirt, I don't know if I would last for 6 years. And to me, it sort of sounded a little bit like if you're in an abusive relationship where your self-esteem is so damaged that you feel that no one else will have you, and you don't dare go anywhere else because you fear being on your own. Was it a little bit like that? Because you just seemed like such an intelligent and capable person. You could have done anything else with your life. You didn't necessarily have to stay in that situation. So why do you think you endured it for so long?
Thank you for all of those lovely thoughts. People in my family, old friends, they were pleading with me to leave. I think there were a couple of reasons why I didn't. One is that I genuinely did not know how else to become the Jew that I wanted to be. I was living in a place where there were no other community options. So partly I needed them. They were not nice people to need, but I really needed to be among them. And yes, one old friend said to me at one point, "Tell me how this is different from the women who stay in abusive relationships saying, yes, he's bad to me, but if I leave him, I'll have no one." And I said to her, as soon as I have a good answer for that, I will let you know. So it really was like that. But also, I think I was wired to stay because I worked the best years of my working life were in extremes. And I stayed beyond reason in communities where the odds were very long. And eventually it all worked out. And I didn't quite understand that it worked out because we all wanted the same thing. So I thought, if I just persevere, this will all come right because we must all want the same thing. And it really took me a long time to acknowledge that at this time, we don't. I agree. It was way too long.
Okay.
Thank you, and thanks for the question, Rona. That was great. I can move on to Chris Critchley, if you could unmute, Chris.
Okay, thanks. Hi, Marilyn. Great talk, thank you. I was just wondering, when you made your anti-Zionist credentials clear, how many like-minded people did you find? Did you find, yeah, okay. I just understood because you're saying you were bullied and you were snubbed and everything else. So is that still the case?
One piece of the story, which, you know, has never been told before. My co-founder at Alternative Jewish Voices and my co-leader at the Independent Minyan. His name is Fred Albert. He's a retired parliamentary librarian. And he shared the politics. And he said, really, he spoke for this book for the first time. He had been an elder of that synagogue 30 years. And I said, how did you survive for 30 years? And he said, I kept my mouth shut. And I said, I'm not really able to keep my mouth shut because I've just come from Gaza. And he grinned very mischievously and he said, no, I don't think you are the type to keep your mouth shut. But he was alone. So he literally stood next to me week after week after week. You know, you go from the service to the Kiddush, and we would assess each service by whether we got to the Kiddush and out the door without incident. And he stood next to me and cut in front of me a number of times when people were coming at me, and they would not come at him. So I certainly would not have withstood it alone. And then there was another circle of people who did agree, but kind of stayed out of the path of the outrage because there was nowhere to go. And we are the people who coalesced as Alternative Jewish Voices. And then there was another circle of people who called me or sent me messages through the years to say, look, I mostly agree with you, but I will never stand up because I don't want to be treated the way you are treated. So, you know, there are all these concentric circles. And then there are a whole lot of people who just pretend they don't know me if they walk past me in the street, and that's just fine by me.
Thank
In a
you.
small place, you become absurdly prominent.
Well, thank you for that, and more power to you.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks, Marilyn. Vivian, do you want to unmute? Chris, if you could mute again. Thank you. Vivian.
Hi. Oh, thank you so much, Marilyn. You speak so poetically. It was a beautiful conversation. Thanks so much. Yes, I was born and grew up in New Zealand, but lived 35 odd years in Australia, and have only recently come back to live. And the contrast between the situation in relation to Indigenous people in Australia and New Zealand couldn't be starker. And I wonder if it, in Australia, they just rejected the very powerless voice proposal that was proposed to be in the Constitution by 2-1. And here in Australia, and in New Zealand, I'm a bit muddled here still, in New Zealand, Aotearoa, the whole thing, I mean, even the rubbish bags are bilingual, you know, and New Zealand English is sprinkled with Māori words. And I was at a recent Palestine conference, national conference, and it was lunchtime and I was going to the table to serve myself, and they said, oh, we're going to have a karakia, meaning a prayer. And I thought, oh God, a prayer. But it was simply a thank you to people who'd worked on the food and helped us and so on. So it was a wonderful blend of the Māori tradition and the, Pākehā, what they call Pākehā. And the new term now, you see, the Indigenous people, Māori, are tangata whenua, the people of the land, and those of us who come after are tangata tiriti, the people of the treaty. And I feel, well, that is, I feel very proud to carry that. And it may make me too starry-eyed because I know the vital statistics of people in prison and life expectancy are not favourable. But but it seemed to me it's a model for what I would love Israel-Palestine to be.
Thank you so much, Marilyn.
It is both true and starry-eyed. We are both of those things, all of us here. I've lived here nearly 40 years, and I lived most of that time in the far north, which has a Māori majority. So I thought really that Māori was normal in New Zealand, as it should be in a sense. But then you look around and you realize the proportions of the Māori community who are over-policed and impoverished and struggling in various ways. You realize that this potential has not been realized. We haven't lost it, as some places have lost it, but it certainly has not been realized. And I think it's magnificent to see, you know, here we have flag wavings. I think they happen all around the world. But if you drive around New Zealand, little villages, hamlets, along the main roads and off the main roads, once a week, 12 people, 24 people will come together to wave Palestinian flags along the main road. They are far from the headlines, but they are keeping this thing visible and present. And if you really want to feel uplifted, all you need to do is drive to one of these flag wavings and be reminded what grassroots means. Well, there are also flags of Māori sovereignty at those flag wavings. And the connection reminds us that Palestine is also an indigenous struggle. And the connection reminds us that there's nothing to be afraid of. I have no fear that Māori sovereignty means the end of my standing. I am tangata te tiriti. I have my place here within that model, that agreement. It is starry-eyed, but it's also real. And that is the model that we have to offer. We don't have numbers. We'll never make an impression through our volume. But there's a model that people might take note of.
Thank you. I've got Miriam next on Mickey, and then Richard and Jonathan in that order. So Miriam, would you like to unmute and make your point or ask your question?
Yes. Thank you, Marilyn, for a most engaging talk. And it really makes me want to read your book. And I'm sorry I haven't already read it. I intended to, but there's just so much to read at the moment that I'm afraid I can't keep up. But I wanted to ask you 2 questions based upon, in a way, the analysis you made at the end of your talk about Trump being a tyrant. So my question is, first of all, about your Jewish upbringing and why you didn't realize from your Jewish upbringing how patriarchy was embedded in your Jewish upbringing, you know, the 3 patriarchs and the 4 matriarchs and so on that we're about to say in 2 weeks' time at a Seder night. It becomes kind of endemic in forms of Judaism. So it's not that I'm not applauding what you tried to do, but I'm surprised that you didn't realize what battles lay ahead in forms of Judaism, despite Judaism's, I think, originally excellent social values and values of justice and at least some form of equity, if not equality. So that's one question. And the second one is linked with it, which is that I think that Trump just exemplifies the most horrendous patriarch now, as much as he is a tyrant. And so I'm wondering whether you could embed some of that kind of analysis into your excellent analysis of what you think about Trump. And I say this, and I should have said this at the beginning, as somebody who sees herself as a Jewish socialist feminist. So it's my feminist analysis that leads me to ask you these questions. Thank you.
Right.
And Mary, just for your information, Mickey is one of the key people in our education group, so she's
Okay.
it'll be useful
Well,
for you to know that.
let me start back there. Part of the reason why I didn't feel the patriarchal nature of Judaism very strongly is because I grew up in a family of women. We were 4 daughters and a mother and a very outnumbered father. So in our enactments of Judaism, we're pretty female-led. And I simply did not grow up with any sense of disadvantage. In fact, I had to learn as an older, not as a child, that the world was not composed the way our family was composed. So I did not I grew up, of course, seeking what was good for women, but I didn't grow up with any sense that we lacked it. We ruled the roost. I did, though, refuse to have a bat mitzvah because the bar mitzvahs looked meaningful and the bat mitzvahs for girls
Exactly.
were meaningless. So, well, I responded by just quitting Hebrew school and carrying on with life. So I was very late to the issue. Let me update. In our independent minyan, which is growing beautifully, for years, our Seder, our holiday dinners, were 3 people, my co-founder Fred, his partner, and myself. This year, I'm hosting 10. I'm looking at the table and wondering where they will fit. So we, like others, are growing happily in that way. We take the stance that we can find what we need in our texts and our history, but the task, like the task of Midrash, is to make the words do new work. And it is such a rich inheritance that we can do that. Our analysis is not always along the axis of feminism. Last year, for example, we were focusing our Seder around Aaron Samuel Tamares, who formulated a Jewish imperative for nonviolence. This year, we'll be formulating it around the idea that a postmodern Judaism is one which is open to the many narratives and the many experiences for the future. So we take all these different approaches to find the thinkers and draw out of the text what we need. I do want to say a word about, I can't possibly cover all of it in one comment, but I do want to say one word about women in Gaza, if I might. My team, my inner team in Gaza was predominantly female, not intentionally. We were tech-oriented. We were building a social enterprise for young people who had graduated with 5-year IT degrees, bilingual degrees. And because the internet jumps the blockade wall, we were trying to establish a more sustainable basis for industry in Gaza. And when I spoke to these young women about the applicants for programs and so on, I realized they were not raised with this assumption that women go into nursing or literature and men do technology. They simply were not raised with those preconceptions. So the women in Gaza, they navigated a very different set of potentials and limitations. And I feel like that is really worth understanding. We gloss over their situation. Yeah, I'll leave it there. just because of time, but I think it's a subject like, frankly, the women in Afghanistan. When women are that oppressed, they don't go silent, they don't go away, they find different ways. And that, for me, has always been worth exploring. Same thing with our religion. We never disappeared. We just need to find different ways.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thanks, and thanks for that, Mickey. Richard.
Thank you. It's absolutely fascinating, Marilyn. I really, really enjoyed it. I also had a kind of feeling of it being a completely different world from the world I inhabit, the world I grew up in, the world we operate in. We have no Maoris as counterpoints to us in this imperial heartland. We have a sense of superiority which dominates the political world we live in, and certainly, you know, could make no truck with accommodation with other people's sovereignties, as shown in the Brexit decision and all of that. So I think it is a pretty different world. But what I'm interested in is the differences in the Jewish communities, or in the community you've been able to construct. Because I was actually brought up in South Africa. I became a Zionist as a way of opposing apartheid. That was liberatory in opposition to what was going on there. But it was also in opposition to organized religion. I grew up in an Orthodox community. My grandfather had been president of the Federation of Synagogues, and religion was used to justify apartheid, and I became utterly secular. And I have to say, I have remained that way to this day, which does make a huge problem in constructing the kinds of communities you're talking about. And I think it's reflected in the fact that Jews for Justice for Palestinians and Jewish Voice for Labour are organizations of old people. Not entirely, but 60, 70, 80 is not an uncommon age of someone in our meetings. Younger people in an organization like Nalmod are much more out of the Jewish community and have a sense of Jewishness, even if they reject the organized religion, in a way that I think the generation that dominates these two organizations I mentioned just doesn't have. And our problem always, 20 years ago, we were talking about how to recruit younger people in Jews for Justice for Palestinians. We're 20 bloody years older, and we haven't solved that problem. And it really is a serious and significant problem, expressed, I think, quite well in your notion of the community, you know, and the need for community. Even the flag waving, which you mentioned, just sounds incredibly moving as a communal experience. And I think we need to think of more things of that kind, where we can connect ourselves to other people through these shared endeavors. We're so much out on the streets in protest about this. It's largely reactive. Necessarily, I'm not diminishing it at all, but I think we found it quite difficult to think of positive ways in which we can build communities that we value for their own sake. And your experience is interesting there. And I just wonder if you've got any reflections on what might be possible, or what we should try to think about in the very different kind of world we inhabit in the UK. Thank you.
Yeah, well, the generational thing is very real. When we established Alternative Jewish Voices, I was 60, my co-founder is 70. So I get that. And in fact, somewhere in the introduction to this book, I said, this really feels like a handover note, because we are coming into, it has changed. Gaza is now at the forefront of a whole set of world-changing issues. You know, this is a new world that we are being shown. When people stand up for Gaza, they are rejecting a new world vision with the most disastrous consequences for the Jewish community, of course, but people are dying, and that needs to be top of agenda. And that change indicates to me that increasingly we need to be led by people who are fighting for the future of their world. rather than looking over their shoulder and saying, oh, this wasn't supposed to happen. So I agree with the generational issue. Here in New Zealand, there is now a second organization called Daenu, and that is the young front row activist, the community builders for young people. We, Alternative Jewish Voices, we regard ourselves as being more of the brain trust.
Mm.
We create the resources. We have faith in our neighbors to make good decisions with those resources. We've been making the rounds of government ministries year after year to talk about Jewish pluralism, not only anti-Zionism, but the fact that Zionism is not a monopoly. I think that pluralism is critical because if Zionism is allowed to define Jewish identity as they are seeking to do, then we're all out of luck. So that has always been our founding principle, Jewish pluralism, and that includes anti-Zionism. We do see that as a long task. You know, what to do? I completely agree that protest becomes reactive because this thing is unfolding so fast. There's so much to react to. And you feel like, I can't let this go by, I need to react. I can't let that go by, I need to react. And it's very hard to get in front of it. We are so fortunate here with our Palestinian partner group. They're called Justice for Palestine. They and we have sort of grown up together, and it is in their bylaw that they foster Palestinian leadership. So they have this front row of young, magnificently articulate in their analysis as well as their speech, primarily Palestinian women, primarily women, who have now cut their teeth on this for 5 years. And they keep coming up with things that are not reactive. They keep saying, this week we're doing something new. This week it's poetry. This week it's music. We are celebrating Palestinian culture. Come with us for a meal. They want people to know what Palestine is beyond tragedy. I can't tell you how deeply I admire them. If you just look up their website, you'll see a whole array of positive assertions of identity. As I said earlier, Indigenous struggle is about living as well as struggling. We're a little bit conditioned to the tragedy. They have grown up conditioned to living through the tragedy.
That's really helpful. Could you
Fantastic.
just say again the name of the group so that we can share that and find the website?
Justice for Palestine.
Justice for Palestine.
Democratic, youth-led, primarily Palestinian-led, the smartest pack of young folks. They let me play. They let me be part of it, although I'm not the young folk. I'm very grateful for our partnership.
You're making me feel we should play the poem, the spoken poem, We Teach Life, Sir, which I don't know if you know, Marilyn, and if you, yeah, we have shared it before. But I digress because there are people waiting. So thank you for that, Marilyn. Jonathan, and then Naomi.
Hi, Marilyn. I should
Hello.
just for full disclosure, Marilyn and I generally meet about once a month in an entirely, well, a different context. We meet in Global Jews, which is a world-spanning organization of anti-Zionist Jewish groups, now in about 20 countries. So this is an unusual format for us to meet in. But I've got a couple of questions. One is, you described, I think, very impressively the way you built up a group of people who are religiously or culturally observant in New Zealand. The Jewish Voice for Labour, I know there is nobody that I am aware of who's religiously observant on the executive. And I suspect it's a tremendous minority, but I may be wrong, in our membership. And I just wondered, is there no equivalent? It didn't seem as if Dayenu was that in any way equivalent to us in terms of being distanced from our religion, but present in a sort of inherited Jewish culture. So I just wondered, is there a gap there, or is there anything that's filling it? There was one other question, which is my impression from previous conversations I've overheard or been part of, that you had a considerable success in accessing decision makers at the state level in New Zealand, whereas almost all radical Jewish groups in Britain have utterly failed. There's been a wall of silence and rejection. I just wondered, is there something particular about New Zealand, or is there some way we could emulate that?
Thanks.
Thank you. Nice to see you. In a sense, I would answer both questions by saying I refer to our model as being based on the wisdom of small communities. In terms of our religious and secular and everything in between coexistence, there aren't enough of us to be surrounded by people who are only like us. Alternative Jewish Voices for years consisted of 5 people. We could have held our meetings in the backseat of a taxi. And by a fluke, the co-founder and I are both interested in religion. But the fact is, in small communities, you do not seek only the company of people who agree with you, or you'll be in a very small room. And that's a strength. We have always said Alternative Jewish Voices is based on the anti-Zionist breadth. And in the forthcoming Bloomsbury Encyclopedia of Social Justice, we have our own entry because our model is so unusual. Rather than saying we are a group of people who feel this way, we are a group of people whose views are not represented by the institutional Jewish community. We built that way. And that also was core to our advocacy work. Fred and I, round and round and round we went, and round and round and round we went. I have just handed over those rounds, and I can't tell you how glad I am. Because in office after office, if you simply say, the Jewish community is not monolithic, and the Zionist Jewish institutions do not represent us, we encountered staff who said either, really? Or, oh, thank God. We were extremely welcome because the message of a Jewish monolith is all they had had to work with. Now, that was lovely. And in the days of Jacinda Ardern, that was magnificent. And we made an outsized impact because the message was new and welcome. A couple of years ago, New Zealand elected its furthest right government in decades. And one reason for that is that the right parties out-fundraised the left parties, I have heard, by a factor of 7-1. And then before that, we had Stephen Bannon's lovely comment that New Zealand will be the canary in the coal mine. We'll refine strategies there. So we found ourselves at the cutting edge of some of the ugliness that you have been living with for a longer time. Now our political environment is much more like yours. We are steps behind you, but moving in the same direction. We have a coalition that's led by a right-wing government, but dependent on 2 fringe parties, one of which is very nationalist and one of which is deeply neoliberal, and the tails wag the dog. So our access, which we still have among staff, among the institutional ministries, we have now an entirely different relationship with politicians. So we are using this hopefully one-term government as a time to deepen our relationships with all of the opposition. And then we need to make this a one-term government. I don't know if that's in any way replicable, but our center-left party, for example, our Labour Party, has come a long way in formulating Palestine policy. So we're trying to make use of this time, and then we'll need to be deeply involved in the coming election.
Thank you, Marilyn. I've got Naomi next. And Miriam, I know you want to come back, but I'm going to take Agnes before you get a second bite. But Naomi, please do join us.
Naomi, look!
Hello.
Hello!
Lovely to see you.
And
Well,
you.
absolutely, I agree with everyone who said how fascinating and thought-provoking your talk has been. And it does feel as if you live in a different world. But something you said, I wasn't planning to ask a question or make a comment, but there's something you said which relates to what Jonathan latched onto. And that's this question of a group like ours being a kind of brains trust for the movement, because I hadn't thought of it in that way. And I think that will be very helpful to us, because we are looking for our role, having been set up to support a movement within the Labour Party, which has been crushed. We are looking for a role. And also, I'm just looking at my notes here, talking to government, talking to, I suppose, broadly the establishment about Jewish pluralism. And funnily enough, I have just this morning written to the Director General of the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, which is an important institution, one that our co-chair, Leah's co-chair, Jenny Manson, has been battering with letter after letter after letter for 7 years, with no recognition. Just to make exactly this point, we've recently prepared a sort of briefing saying you are treating a significant minority of Jews who do not share the Zionist perspective of the Board of Deputies and the Jewish Leadership Council and the Jewish Labour Movement and Labour Friends of Israel. You're treating the whole body of dissenting Jews as if we are, as defined by our enemies, cranks, irrelevant, fringe. So it's not just that they don't say, oh, how lovely, we didn't know you existed. They say, yeah, we've heard about you. You're just cranks, you're irrelevant. So this is where, I mean, I don't know if you've experienced that. It sounds like you may have had a more refreshing response when you've tried to make that point. But I'm picking up on what you said there and hanging on to it and hoping that we can, build on this idea. And really, it's more and more important, because since October the 7th, the way that dissenting Jews have been completely marginalized has become dangerous, because we have, Jews are represented in the public domain as supporters of a genocide, and then they complain about anti-Semitism. So, I mean, anything you can say that will help us along this path, particularly the latter point, but perhaps also the other one about how we can be a better brains trust for the movement.
Yes. I'm also aware of time. If we're going to try and finish this in 15 minutes with a little bit of time for Marilyn at the end, I will ask everyone to be succinct. And Miriam, you're probably not going to get a second bite of the cherry. But anyway, Marilyn, please do respond to Naomi.
Yeah, our lovely warm reception was a few years ago. We were lucky in that sense. But to give you just one concrete example, in the week of our establishment, before we had a website, the Jewish institutional community put the IHRA definition before our city council to say, here's a nice thing you could do for us. And we, over the weekend, that's all we had. It was going to be adopted with no consultation because it was thought to be so harmless. And we had a weekend and we had not even a website. So we decided, we called every city councilor that weekend and we said, look, you may have been misled. You may have been insufficiently informed. We assume your goodwill, but perhaps you need a little more information. And so it was withdrawn while they sought a little more information. And that became our template because it was the first thing we'd ever done. And by constantly speaking to our neighbors and even our government with the assumption of goodwill, and by providing, we followed that up by writing an in-depth brief about the IHRA. So we assumed goodwill. And I know that is very different from people who have been hit over the head for a decade. I know that feels different. But somehow the simple fact is that people cannot respond well when they are attacked. Their pre-conscious defenses go up. So in our experience, it is more effective to disarm them, so to speak, by introducing a conversation of goodwill and then proceeding on that basis. Good luck doing that on a bad day.
Thanks. Agnes, and then Naomi, and that will be the last, another Naomi. Agnes, welcome.
Yeah, I mean, this trying to do that method, I'm trying to do that. Last time I did it with Phil Rosenberg at the Holocaust Memorial Day. I didn't manage to get him on side. Okay, so you mentioned Palestinian flag waving in New Zealand. So I'm interested to know, do they get any enthusiastic car hooting? Do they get any harassment? Is anybody arrested if they are waving flags? Here in London, in theory, you can wave the flag, but you may or may not be arrested. There are examples for everything. And later this week, in 3 days' time, I'm going to Hungary, where Viktor Orban banned all demonstrations, anything whatsoever. But unfortunately, it's not only me who is going to Hungary this week, but Netanyahu as well, at the invitation of the Hungarian government, who says they're not going to arrest him. They invited him. They don't care about the ICC, although they signed up. So if next week, in my utter outrage, I started to wave a Palestinian flag in Budapest, I don't think any of you will ever see me. So I'm just wondering how it goes in New Zealand. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Agnes, and for all you do.
So I would just add that we also decide who is worth talking to. And people whose minds are clearly closed, it's not, we don't have the energy for that. It's not that we should rule them out, but we don't have the energy. So we try to choose interlocutors who will be able to listen, and that is not everyone. How do the flag wavings go? They are, by the public, they are well, from what I have seen and read, they are very well received. Lots of tooting, lots of support, lots of people driving fast and driving past and being reminded. But since the resurgence of violence, it seems to also be more frequent that supporters of Israel arrive in a very confrontational mode. We've had some very unpleasant scenes. There is one senior lawyer who's been reported to the Law Society. I mean, he spat his latte. He absolutely went over the top. That kind of thing is now happening here. Legally, our police have been, I think, far more constructive than many. But as our politicians become more beholden to their small coalition partner, we can feel it changing. We can feel it changing quickly. And we look at experiences like yours and we say that's where we're heading. And our response to that is to say that we who can still speak, we really must. We are obligated, if we can do this without facing the disastrous consequences that other people risk in this world, we must do that to preserve our own freedoms and to be the continuity for as long as we can.
Thank you so much. Phew, I'm so glad there's time for Naomi's contribution and question. Naomi Wayne, please.
Thank you very much, Marilyn. I think it made me feel better to think that you were both doing wonderful things, but also struggling. So it is actually, wherever you are in the world, it's quite a lonely thing to be doing if you're Jewish. I was particularly taken by something you said only a few minutes ago. And you talked about the importance of talking to people with whom you didn't agree, because if you didn't, you'd be talking to a very small number of people. You also said, of course, you choose. There are people who you do not talk to because life is short and you won't get anywhere. I suppose I'm probably quite unusual in this group because I grew up in a family which made it easy for me. I've never been a Zionist. And I suppose philosophically, so I've never had to give it up, which from reading the accounts from many of my colleagues was obviously quite a major project and traumatic for some. I suppose philosophically, I'm an anti-Zionist, but I never bothered to talk about it myself like that because what I want to do is talk to people who perhaps are agonized liberal Zionists who hate what's going on, but can't bring themselves to believe it's as bad as you know, they deep down inside fear. And I wonder, I have to say, I've worked with many Jewish opponents of the Israeli government in Israel, as well as people in Gaza and the West Bank. And I've never asked any of them, are you a Zionist? I don't know. Not only do I not know, I don't care. And I look at one of the leading organizations that used to be very cautious and has become more and more important, which is Rabbis for Human Rights, which in Israel, which without them, much of the Jewish opposition from other groups to what is going on in Masafa Yatta, in the rest of the West Bank, would not be able to happen. They provide the transport, they provide the infrastructure. They are absolutely crucial. I'm guessing that most of them are Zionists. And I suppose I'm concerned about a definition of being anti-Zionist in the sense that it could exclude people who would like to work with you, who might even join you. I certainly think that's what a feeling would be here. And I wondered about your thoughts on that. Thank you.
That seems like an excellent final question. Thank you, Naomi. Marilyn, over to you.
For our first years, we simply said we are opposed to Zionism. We are opposed to the occupation, and we declined to get caught up in any of the labels. Only in the last few months, we polled our members, and we said, what do you think about labels now? And people who had not called themselves anti-Zionist said, I see what the project of Zionism has become, and I must declare that I am anti-this. So I now wish to take on this label. And we updated the homepage and so on. And I believe it was Angela Davis who said, when you're working in an environment of racism, and we are in an environment of not only racism, but genocide, it is not enough to be non-genocide. You have to be anti. So we have recently taken on that label. But I am very aware of what you were saying. One of the working title of this book was Why I Am an Anti-Zionist Jew. And I thought an insufficient circle of people will pick that book up, because I'm not interested only in speaking with people who agree with me already. The people who agree with me already, if we were enough to change the world, we would have done it by now. So I changed the title of the book to say Jewish, not Zionist, because I think that is met with more curiosity. And I used to write for Manda Weiss, going way back. And I wrote then a piece about speaking with liberal Zionists, the need to speak with folks who will not close off the conversation but do not agree with me. And while they were happy to publish it, I really got beaten over the head a bit by readers who preferred a kind of ideological purity. And so I have always believed that it's critically important to be speaking not only to the people who are adjacent, but to anyone who's capable of listening, anyone whose defenses have not already gone up to close the conversation off. Because there aren't enough of us. It's that simple. And for the Jewish community, I feel that we are at risk of a real schism, a closing of the Jewish mind that will not heal for a long, long time. And I don't wish to be a part of the closing or the schism. Angry, outraged as I feel, I don't think it is my place to contribute to the divide. It must remain my place to keep speaking to anyone who is able to hear me and not dedicated to my harm. So I'm with you.
Thank you. And very good timing. It's 28 minutes past 7. I almost can't get my head around. Obviously, I was trying to run things, but I'm very glad that we've recorded this, because I think I will definitely watch it again. There's just so much depth to what you have said and to some of the questions and contributions. I would love to have told you more about some of the people who asked questions and what heroes they are, and some of the people who haven't even gone on. So I'm going to do the commercial bit. And Kay, I don't know, Kay Green, if you want to just put your hand up so that you come up, because Kay, basically, we have, and also online, we have a friend who's also from New Zealand but lives in the UK, and she brought over a few copies, and Kay Green published a facsimile version, is what this is. But we now have a UK version with the proper, with full permission, we hasten to add, of the original New Zealand publishers. But we now have a UK edition. And Kay, I don't know if you could bear it, Rona, one thing into the chat. If you could put in how people get hold of it. We will email everyone at some point. I think you will find it very interesting reading, not least because it has an introduction by me. No, but we have, British people like Hilary Wainwright, who many of you have heard. Kay, are you hiding, or maybe she's dropped off? Don't worry. I don't want to waste too much of your time. Huge thank you to Marilyn for writing the book, for being in Gaza, for being in Cambodia, for being in Afghanistan before then, and for writing this book. We can't get hold of her other book, Still Lives, so easily in this country. And we didn't talk to Jonathan.
It's on Amazon as an ebook, but it's out of print.
I'm not encouraging anyone to buy anything from Amazon. I'm sorry, that's not a JVL position, but I'm sorry, I feel it really adamantly. But ebooks are possible. I will leave you to it. It's called Still Lives, and it's directly about her experiences, Marilyn's experiences in Gaza. I think you've given us a huge amount of food for thought. What I was going to say is that Jonathan's the only person who mentioned Global Jews for Palestine, which is where we met you. And without that connection, there would not have been a UK version. There would not have been this meeting. And we haven't time to address it. But I know that Marilyn has hugely appreciated that connection, because she feels often so isolated out there in New Zealand. But we're hugely grateful to have her involvement and her wisdom.